Welcome to Inside Open Technologies, presented by CSuite Edge.
Hi, and welcome to the CSuite Edge Inside Open Technologies. I'm your host, John Light. I'm also the CEO and founder of Sabretooth Recruiting. And today I am bringing the big guns out for our audience, namely in one, Dr. Mark Lennox. Mark and I have known each other for years. He's recently authored a white paper called The Rise of the All-Stack Developer. If you haven't seen it, you should absolutely go get it. And we're also joined by David Robinson today. And David, one of the reasons that I was so excited about having you come on and participate in our conversation is you authored a white paper as well called The Thinking Tax. And it was one of those things when I read it, I kind of went, okay, this is really discombobulating, because you cover some things that I think, generally speaking, a lot of business leaders, of course, normal consumers, but business leaders especially, don't have visibility on and what's happening in AI development and the AI world. So as we get started, would you mind giving us a little rundown on your background, your white paper, and then let's push off into this conversation.
Sure. I'm happy to be here today. Spent most of my life trying to solve complicated problems in business. A lot of that has been around software. And so today I'm the founder and CEO of a company called 9606 AI. So 6 is the genomic classification for human being. So in the geekiest way possible, our company is named Human AI. And one of the things that we do is we try to help people manage AI tools. And in thinking about that, this idea that we've created a new economy, a whole new kind of way of thinking about how we pay for software called the token. And so this token economy has really taken over with AI, and all of the developments that we're seeing now, where AI is the brain of all these new things like agents and workflows, become really problematic, I think, when you start to consider the cost of actually using this. But this is all being done by industry design. This is a very specifically engineered business model that's quite different from anything we've seen in software as a service or traditional software purchasing. And I think it's something the world needs to find out more about.
Yeah, and it's really intriguing. You mentioned SaaS, and SaaS has been the monster on the street corner now for a while. And the challenge with it is it's just getting kneecapped when it comes to value because of AI and the great giant leaps ahead of things that are happening in it. And I know, Mark, with your company that you're leading, in addition to being in the VC space, you're also the CEO of one of the portcos, and a CEO, how do I put this? A CEO of two, not companies, two people, yourself and a go-to-market person.
That's right.
When
The
you
modern
looked
way,
at
man.
this,
Yes.
when you,
And from that perspective, I really understand a lot more about what's happening to the SaaS companies. I mean, it's pretty clear. Like for example, for us, our CRM system, we coded that up ourselves in a couple of days. And so that's the system that drives all of our CRM stuff. I don't have to go to Salesforce for any of that. And why would I? I'm trying to do a really lean startup, and I just replaced them in a very short period of time. And I'm not surprised to see them get kneecapped in their stock valuation as they are.
right. Well, it's not just Salesforce. I mean, think
It's
about what it's doing. Yeah, to the SAPs of the world, to the Oracles, and the fear that's going on there. Their valuations have been hit so hard. And you bring up an interesting point, and I'd like to get both of your thoughts on this. Hey, I went in and, as you said, I'm just kind of paraphrase, quote, / making up whatever it was you just said. I went in and I replaced something like Salesforce at a nominally low cost and effort. I think it demonstrates that the algos themselves, the software, is becoming eminently replicatable, or at least we can build something that's very similar in a very short period of time, minimal investment. And my question is around, when you look between your two respective white papers, The Rise of the All-Stack Developer and The Thinking Tax, how is this dynamic, do you foresee here in the near term, going to play out? Because you have these big SaaS companies, huge numbers of employees, right? And now they need to get in and kind of ride the wave. I don't know that they're equipped to ride it the way that you're doing it right now, or how you might have in mind. So maybe, David, you could share some thoughts from structurally what's inhibiting them.
So I think developers are probably the first area where LLMs really have had an impact in creating value for work and charging appropriately for it. And so we've seen the token tax change dramatically when you're now paying $25 for a PR. So people set it up and do 10 or 100 overnight. You can spend quite a bit of money doing that. Benson Wang recently came out and said if your top developers are not spending $250,000 a year in tokens, they're not doing their job. And he might have even said 250,000 a month. It's kind of a crazy number.
Right.
So the two things that are sort of coming into coincidence, one is software as a service is relatively easy to replicate or duplicate given modern AI tools, and you can do it quickly. A lot of us have had the experience of running into a marketing company where we listen to the pitch and think, wow, that's a good product idea. And then we code it over the weekend because it's something that just seems to make so much sense. Where there are opportunities, though, for the full stack developer, and why I think developers are particularly well suited as an example, is developers actually interact with AI. For
Mhm.
most people in enterprise business, we're seeking to outsource our intelligence, and developers are really accelerating their intelligence. And I think those are two very different things culturally. And I actually think Mark is the best example of this because we were at dinner about 6 weeks ago, and I had my two senior developers with me there, and they were talking about pair programming. One of them uses Codex and one uses Claude Code. And I've just watched, everybody who's been around that environment just blossom, including Mark. Although it does look like you've slept last night, Mark. That's a good change to
Yeah,
see.
yeah. I can only go so far.
But it's the ability to accelerate your development. And so it's very much more hands-on than it is typically with enterprise customers who are using LLMs for business applications.
Interesting. And I mean, you talk about Jensen getting up there and saying, well, they ought to be spending $250,000 in token costs monthly, annually, whenever it is. There's been a lot of layoffs amongst the large SaaS companies and other tech companies. And I've been scratching my head about, is this because they don't need the people, or because they need to reduce the head count and redirect those funds into their AI investment dollars or expenditure dollars that they're using? But I mean, Mark, I'm already one of your guinea pigs for the tech you've been rolling out. You and I talked about that earlier, and we're going through going, wow, John, you're always in a great mood. I don't know how true that is, but it says I am. I'm really curious, though, when you look at, don't give away the secret sauce or anything, but when you look at what you've done from starting from 0 to 1 to your product that's, you're getting ready for, to start measuring product market fit and whatnot, what kind of actual expenditure outside of your time and brain horsepower has really been involved?
Surprisingly little, because these AI tools like Claude Code, which I'm a huge fan of, it makes it so. I mean, it just accelerates everything I do. And I kind of, when all this AI stuff started coming out, I said, what I really want is AI to do the dishes for me so I can do art. Yeah. And the problem is that where we're at kind of currently, especially given all this AI slop we see out in the world, is there's a fair amount of AI is doing a fair amount of art, not very well, but and then
Right.
we'll call it art loosely, but it's still not doing the dishes for me. And AI coding tools are in fact doing the dishes for me. They are helping me with everything up and down the stack, and I'm a full stack developer from way back. I've got my 10,000 hours and then some in multiple fields. So I know what good code looks like, and I know how that all works out. And so for me, not spending my time dealing with the specifics of a particular call and working in some particular things, I can review that code a whole lot faster than I can write it. So
Right.
for me, that's just a huge benefit because now I'm spending a lot more of my time doing the more human things, like looking at the real business the product and how it's going to interact with our customers and how we're going to get it to market, and making sure that the privacy documentation is okay, and some of these other the other terms and conditions, all these things that you have to have a viable business are taken care of. It's accelerating me dramatically by doing the dishes for me, so I can go faster.
Isn't it? When I first heard the term and you started throwing out all stack developer, and you and I talked about it a few weeks ago, I kind of sat back and looked at it. Wow, it's not just someone who can code or has coded or even knows what good code looks like. It's a lot more than that. It's a level of the term I threw out is business acumen involved. One of the biggest complaints back at the end of 22, we ran a 50-person survey, 50 CHROs, and who shared with us when we collated all the data, we brought it all together. The two biggest complaints they heard from their internal customers was that their recruiters didn't understand technical requirements and they didn't understand the business. They didn't understand how we function, what our product is or our service, how we make money. And when I hear all stack developer, I think about someone who not only can develop that code, that software, that system, if you will, they know what good looks like in the context of the stack for the whole business, i.e., how do we make money? How do we deliver? How do we serve? And I'm curious if that's an accurate rendition.
That's it. I think that's the heart of the whole thing. Is now we're at a position where the software stack is one thing, but there's a lot of stacks in these different companies. And there's regulatory stacks and financial stacks and different. I use the term stack as just a body of knowledge. So my whole concept with all stack is for guys like me, especially who are hardcore developers, but also have quite a bit of business background and acumen.
Mm-hmm.
Then we can really do things in a very tight loop that are happening very, very quickly. And we can create organizations that are really more judgment based than they
Mm-hmm.
are process based. And that's a powerful concept.
Well, and talking about that, and David, this might be something that really leans into your space there in the thinking tax. Again, hearkening back to Jensen's comment and other comments, that I think Mark and I were listening to a podcast not long ago separately. Of course, we're not like hanging out, drinking coffee, listening to podcasts normally. I mean, we are a little far distance away, but the fellow was saying that, he's wrapping up token costs for one developer is at least one other headcount, the equivalent. So I get this idea that people are getting let go because they need those dollars to put into this sort of thing. I sit back and look at this, and I think this is a rub a lot of us run into, because when Mark talks about these loops, you've got your development loop, but you've got your review loop. When you start tightening things up and kind of giving feedback, if you will, it can be so quick because you're not tied down into the dirt, but it's very output focused. We want to get to whatever I determine the end needs to look like, what good looks like. But you posit in the thinking tax white paper that the way the market is structured by the big frontier LLMs is we're not paying for outcomes, we're paying for the process itself. And it's kind of like, I guess the way I read it, how I read into it, is like going to a restaurant and you order a meal and you want your steak done a certain way and so on and so forth. And they bring it out and you're a medium guy and it is medium rare. Like, send that rascal back. Or it comes out and it's tougher than boot leather. You send that rascal back. Finally, the third time they get it right. And all you pay for is that third time. But with these LLMs, we're paying for every time they go back in the kitchen and cook
That's
this
right.
thing, whether it's right or wrong.
That's a great analogy. And you also lean into the fact of why LLMs work so well for developers. If you understand the way mathematics work in an LLM, once you tokenize and vectorize it and you get into the attention layers, what you're doing is you're actually encoding, you're actually focusing your attention layers on a relatively small part of the universe that's involved in the training set. And that's the training data around a specific type of coding. When you're using it for a business application, you don't get that benefit. You send the same 2-sentence prompt, it gets tokenized, vectorized, and sent into the attention layer. And then you're paying the model to try to think about what those 2 sentences meant. What's your real question? What's the context? How is your language used? And instead of looking at this little corner of the mathematics and the model where coding lives, you're looking at all of it. You're looking at kings and queens and men and women over here and cars and airplanes over here and philosophy and art and everything else over there. So you actually have a much larger attention window to cope with when you're using traditional enterprise applications. And that thinking tax doesn't end there. Every time you make another query or you send the steak back in your analogy, which very clever, I've stolen that now. It's I'm going to use that tomorrow in my demo, in fact. So your value is already there. Thanks so much, John. But the whole concept here is we've created this economy that is transparent in the way that it's priced, but opaque in the way that it's used. And so, for example, take that little right-hand corner. If you're a developer, you know that the box that you actually select there, whether you're using the highest model or the lowest model, costs you actual money. Most people in business don't know that. They always select the best option because they think that's going to get them the best result, even though it doesn't necessarily get them the best result. It just costs them the most to think about the best result.
I do that all the time.
It's human beings. I could go through a long list of what the enterprise frontier models have done to create spin. I call it spin spend. It's every time you start the model thinking, and I'll give you a specific example. If you do skills calls, the models used to bundle all the skills under one command line. You do a skills call, it was one thought, you bring the skill in, and they work pretty well. Now, to get skills to work better, according to them, each skill call is now a separate command line. So if you're watching your GPT, it will say thinking, thinking, thinking. It'll give you 5 or 6 lines as it thinks through what skill it needs. You're paying for that. So it's not much. It's 25 cents for it to make a decision about a skill. But when you compound that over the millions of people that are using the model, it becomes very significant in terms of revenue. And so think of the models as saying, we want to be really friendly and give you as much transparency as we can, but we're going to keep the water over here really muddy so that you can't really see what's going on there. Now, in the world of traditional enterprise users, that's a real problem. Coders all know this. Every coder I know in the world that's working like Mark works with 7 screens open and running different agents, they've got a little meter right there on their screen to tell them what their token spend is, to remind them, select the right model, select the right approach that you're using. But there's a bigger problem with this, John, and it's that when we think about businesses, what we're paying for when we pay a model to think is not deterministic. What we're paying for is for a model to make things up about our business. And we can either artifact that into a hallucination in our business or contaminate it from the prior training set. So the idea would be to use the model as a voice, not necessarily the brain, if you're an enterprise user.
That's an interesting point. I just read a study. I think it just popped out this morning. I already forget who did it, but they were looking at these LLMs that are coming out specific to the legal space, from LexisNexis and some other player. And they pointed out that they're measuring, there's still 17% of the answers were wrong. In addition, 62% of the time, the hallucinations the model had appeared to be, maybe even intentionally, hidden in a way that there was some opacity to it. You couldn't see it easily, right? It didn't just jump out at you. Some passing reference to a judge who never existed, or a court case or a court that never existed. And it's really easy in the legal mumbo jumbo and the big stew of legal writing to overlook that kind of stuff. And I remembered thinking, and I thought about both of my papers when I'm reading this. I'm like, on one hand, it's like, okay, this is very probabilistic, because what a lot of people don't understand, and correct me if I'm wrong in this, when you look at these LLMs, there are no real consequences for bad decisions. They just go back and reprocess. That's how they generate revenue. Now, you take a human person, a child, and little Johnny's walks into the kitchen, reaches on the stove and grabs a pan, burns his hand. There's an immediate negative consequence. And you know what? He's probably not going to do that. He might reach up there, but he's tentative. He's going to feel whether or not that pan is going to burn him again. LMs don't have that. These models don't have it. So the only thing they can do is they try to give you what it probabilistically figures is the right answer. And it led us, when we wrote and developed our plan for the technology we developed inside Sabretooth, our perspective was ML is a much better tool than a lot of the AI stuff that's out there for some of these tasks, because then we know the answer is reliable. And I'm wondering, what are the questions enterprise users are not asking about this technology wave that they ought to be asking? Because 17% miss rate is not good, and something that's is being marketed as we don't miss, but you did miss. I mean, what are we not asking? What are the right questions that people aren't asking who are making decisions to invest in or purchase these tools?
So I think the first thing to do, let's talk about this from the standpoint of what I would call sovereign AI. And we've all heard that term.
Exactly.
Mhm.
So sovereign AI, at the cultural level, that means that your country has AI development for your country. We've heard about DeepSeek with China, doesn't
Right.
want you to criticize Taiwan. We've all seen what happens when you ask Grok a nasty question about Elon Musk, right? So we're familiar with those sort of utilities. Where we're less familiar, I think, is in the idea that we're outsourcing our intelligence. So when you're a company and you share things with the model, let's say you sign up for ChatGPT, and your employees are now loading your company's proprietary data into their notes, their training sets, and their
Right.
chats to try to get things better. All of that is consumed into the training set for the model. And once that happens, that doesn't belong to you anymore, and you can never get that data out. So your competitive information will leak. It will leak in the form of contamination or hallucination.
Mhm.
The second thing to keep in mind is why these hallucinations happen. I encourage everybody to be very careful about anthropomorphizing what we think LLMs are and giving it human characteristics. What you just talked about is absolutely true, but imagine that each time you prompt that LLM, you're opening the attention window and inviting even more creativity. So your first answer might be 85% right. Your second answer might be 89% right, but your third, fourth, and fifth answer might be 42% right. So that's the challenge that you have. And the idea is and so at the sovereign AI, what the enterprise models are trying to convince you is put our AI behind your firewall, right? It'll be your AI. And a lot of these AI companies for legal have done that, where
Mhm.
they're now training the model on a proprietary data set. The problem there is you're into it for millions of dollars to do your own model training at a
Yeah.
minimum. We've all heard about how expensive that is. And then the problem is, how many vendors do you think there will be for LLMs in 5 years? Right now, there's 15 frontier models. In 5 years, we might have 10,000
Yeah.
because open weight models and open source models are going to proliferate like nobody has ever seen. Then think about the problems you have. I got a call from one of our potential customers the other day, and he says, Claude is down. What do I do? Claude is down. I want to switch models. So on one hand, you can sign up for Amazon's Bedrock, and Amazon lets you switch models.
Right.
But in order to switch a model, you've got to have your context and your files and all your data and all your information. So your switching costs are very, very high. So I maintain that what sovereign AI is control over the interface surface that interfaces with your AI. And your tools should allow you to use any AI that you want to use, switch on the fly, maintain all of your files and your file security behind your firewall, and share only the information with the GPT that you need to share to get the right grammar output. That's what true sovereign AI is.
Yeah, agreed. Man, I would have my own servers running right now if the cost for an H100 card wasn't 25 grand a piece. I mean, it's I'm kind of waiting for I'm hoping Nvidia will come out with some newer stuff and we'll get some H100s on the on the secondary market because they're just hard to come by.
Well, that brings up, I think, a really interesting point, because I think the general calculus people have used when it comes to figuring out buy versus build is changing pretty rapidly. I think with Opus 4.6 and 4.7, OpenClaw for a brief time, me and some of these other models, my hunch is that people who understand coding and development have a nice leg up right now, but in 6 to 12 months that changes. And people who have experience in other domains, but not necessarily have been coding or developers, but then maybe they've been builders. Take a carpenter, for example, or someone who's building a home and you know what it needs to look like in the end. They'll be able to come in and start using this tool. And so the question is, 5 years from now, to your point, David, when we talk about potentially having 10, 15, 50,000 LLMs to pick from, it's going to get really commoditized. I got to really wonder what the differentiators are going to be amongst those outside of price, because at that volume, I don't know that there is a more effective, efficient differentiator than price. But at what point does the calculus of buy versus build turn into just build?
So that's what the agent revolution is, right? Everybody's trying to convince you can use LLMs to build all these tools that will orchestrate everything that you're using and get you specific results.
Mm-hmm.
And OpenClaw is a great example. I'm glad you mentioned that. This is the problem with the AI business in spades. OpenClaw came onto the market. It was really easy to use. LLM is the brain. We don't really care about the errors that it makes, because if it deletes my email, the cost of that failure is relatively low. And
Right.
Anthropic watched Claude climb the ladder to 1 million users and then said, well, that's a great idea. We're going to release Claude Claw and Claude Work. And now OpenClaw is back to what? 10 users. So you can easily be consumed by the top. What we were talking about before with the full stack programmers, you can also be consumed by the bottom. If you've got a thin wrapper, and I think some of the legal AI fills in this realm, an AI company, once you build that market, can step in and just say, oh, we'll take your wrapper off. We're going to do that now, because the ontology is well understood and they can serve those things up. So I think there's some interesting dynamics that are happening in the market around that. The case I would make is that the coming wave of agentics is missing one big piece, and that's governance. How do you as a user orchestrate your tools on your desktop without having to use an LLM as the brain? How do you do that using machine learning language and deterministic processes? And then how do you send information to the LLM that is matched to the mathematics of the attention and reasoning layers, or what we call reasoning in an LLM, so that you can minimize token spend and maximize the benefit of your output? That's the wave that I think is coming now, and it's going to be all about agentic control and effective governance.
So if we can easily replicate the algos, what's left, Mark? I mean, what's left to build a moat with, besides good looks and, relationships?
Data
Data.
is the moat, and your ability to use things in a consistent way, right? And that Dave kind of got into that. So that has to do a lot with your processes. But if you have your own proprietary data that you're working with, that is yours and yours alone, that's about the only thing I think you can protect. The algorithms you can slide different LLMs in just fine, and it won't be long. And Nematron Ultra is already out, and that it performs exceptionally well in most conditions that we need to deal with, and it's the right price. So we need to be able to take advantage of some of those things, and it's coming. It's coming like a freight train for all of us.
I think, and David, I think, that's one of my concerns. I look at it and, I'm in a commoditized space in the talent space, right? And the recruitment and headhunting and whatnot. But I know how valuable data is in that, and not the wrappers of data. This is one of the places where I think we can differentiate ourselves. There's data, but I also think there's an opportunity when it comes to process. The big companies that are out there, they've invested millions, tens of millions, hundreds of millions, billions in their existing processes, and they are a hard ship to turn. Small rudder, very big vessel. And they don't want to let go of that. But the fact is, commoditized industry spaces like recruitment, where I sit, are ripe for process improvement in ways I think that people haven't thought of, because what we've been doing is taking existing processes, and you guys have seen it, and we wrap tech around it, And all we end up doing is industrializing inefficiency. And, I'm curious when we look at this, and Dave, this question is for you, because I think this is really, really critical. I think Mark is spot on with data is the moat. Controlling your data, being sovereign in your data as a business and as an individual, that's key. Having said that, what other avenues do we have? Well, I think it's process improvement. And to your point, a lot of what you talk about in the thinking tax is really about process. And what are those processes? I need to control governance. I need, okay, pre-show confession. Mark and I were talking, and I'm like, this is kind of like you're flying an airplane, Mark, and you're cruising through the mountains and all this, and you're moving the yoke or the stick or the pedals, and nothing's working. But this guy who doesn't know how to fly is sitting right next to you or behind you or wherever. He's got control, and he's making it do stuff in your aircraft that you don't want it to do, like fly into a mountain or go invert it into a lake or whatever it might be. And so what are your thoughts around that? I mean, are we using the technology in the best and brightest way if all we're doing is keeping what's already there and doing the same thing faster and at a higher volume?
So first of all, kudos for using any kind of an airplane analogy with Mark. You clearly know your audience well. That's the other third of his life. So I also use the airline analogies. What I use is the air traffic control, and that's the product that we make at 9606. Is we're the people that tell you where you can land, when you can land, how you're supposed to land, what direction you're going, and give you all of the things that you need to do to make that airplane work correctly. So I do think that where there's a moat is in AI infrastructure that removes or completely separates the brain from the thinking. So right now we want to use LLMs because we call them good at reasoning. They're not good at reasoning. They're good at pattern matching. And we're throwing all of these deterministic business processes we worked with for 70 years overboard, rather than saying, let's adopt these processes to these tools, and let's create a way for us to get the best out of these tools, but I don't want to share any of my information. So the sort of 5 things that you want to look at your own data sovereignty. How do you keep your data at your location, not allow it to be consumed into training sets, and not allow it to be later decrypted in somebody's, one of your competitors' places. The second is vendor lock-in. You don't want to be locked into somebody because when their system is down that morning, all of your employees are not productive. And yes, you can sign up for a model switcher, but then you have to have all of your data to put into another model. Now you've got twice the interface surface on your cybersecurity problem. The third problem is you're paying the model to think. When you give it that simple 2-sentence prompt, you're outsourcing your intelligence. Our platform requires you put that same 2-sentence prompt in, but we use all the work you've done, all your files, all the things on your laptop to make decisions about what you're really trying to say. So we'll send that off to match the mathematics of the attention layer so that your answer costs you a lot less. There's a lot less thinking involved. You're just taking the grammar out of it. And then when you get a product, you want to be able to format it. And if you've ever tried to get any formatting done in a GPT, they're pretty good, but they're pretty formulaic. If you do a PowerPoint, you get the same 3 boxes on every slide and the same call out buttons, no matter how many times you do it. And that's true for everything else they do. And then the last thing you want is you don't want any of your own personal behavior consumed by the model. That's the next thing, the thing we don't talk about. But every correction, every misspelling, every time you change your thought or change your thinking, that's all consumed into the model's behavioral characteristics. Wait till world models come. Have you seen the videos of people in China where there's like 50,000 people in some giant 1,000,000-square-foot warehouse, and they've all got on headsets so that they can watch them work? Those guys are training the generation of robots that's coming to replace them in a year from now.
Yeah,
and that's what we're all doing.
I've heard that, and I wonder, what does a path forward really look like if we view AI, contrary to Elon. Elon thinks we all need a high UBI, and I don't know, you sit on a couch and eat bonbons or picnic in the park, or you look like a Friends episode where you're just hanging out at the coffee shop all the time. And I don't think AI can replace or change core human nature. We have to be doing something. We have to have purpose. We have to, have our hands laying into something. What do you think the way is forward for AI to continue to help us be better humans rather than to replace us?
So I actually think AI brings great promise to human beings. I think the problem that we've got is that we've created a new kind of economy where the people that are operating that economy make money from the way they've structured it, and they don't want it to
Hmm.
change. LLMs are not the solution. They're not going to get to AGI, and they're never going to give businesses the sort of deterministic output that's going to be acceptable in regulated businesses. And I think we're going to see that on and on and on. Personally, I think AI has been an amazing tool for me for learning. The world moves at lightning speed now, and AI is one of those remarkable tools that can help you keep up with your learning.
Yeah.
And now, Mark, you're back. I'm looking to you on this answer.
Okay. I've been out for a couple minutes, so
Well, the
So how
question
is
is,
AI going to make the world a better place?
well,
what's our way forward so we don't end up as just training Elon's robot horde?
yeah, that's a good point. I go back to the dishes thing. I think if we can do this in the right way, where it can take away, some of the drudgery that we have to deal with on a regular basis and allow us to do the things that are most human, then that's where
Mhm.
we can gain. The problem with that is there are still people that currently do the dishes. And we have to make sure that it's economically appropriate across the full spectrum to make it fair and make it right. And that's a much harder question. Dealing with the economics of the situation is much different than dealing with all the rest of it, because AI in general is an exceptionally powerful tool. And it's nothing more than that. I mean, it's just a really powerful tool. And throughout history, we have used we as humans have used tools in
Mhm.
more and more effective ways to do everything that we do. And that always creates more opportunity and more capability and more economic growth and more of everything that we all want. But when we switched from horse-drawn carriages to cars, there was a lot of concern about what was going to happen to all the people who were making buggies and coach whips and stuff like that. And it turned out to not be so much of a problem because, of course, we're building cars. And, even in technology terms, in the early days when we had switchboard operators who were who were operating switchboards by plugging things in manually. Well, what was going to happen to them when you couldn't didn't have that anymore? We had automatic things. You had, these dial things on your phone. You could dial a number. And once, that we got over that too. And we've figured out ways to use those people. And there's really not very many switchboard operators anymore. Um, for the current situation, though, it's pushing, I think, a lot more into like what we would call white collar work, or people who are
Right.
using a little more of their they're not using their physical skills, they're using their mental skills. And there's a huge demand there to try to use AI to do that. And in the end, judgment is a very human thing. I think it's probably the most human thing we do, making those trade-off decisions about what's right and what's wrong and what's
Mhm.
probably the best and what's not. And AI is not particularly good at that. And you tell it you want to win. Well, what does that mean? And
Yeah.
the meaning of some of that is really hard. So we're going to get into that more, I am sure. But you know, I look at it and I see on the far future, I see a lot of demographic problems, and there's fewer people around. And how are we gonna deal with some of those things? And we already are at a kind of a negative in terms of population here in the United States, and it's not too bad. But places like China, they're about to collapse. There's a
Yeah,
lot
they've got major issues
of
there.
concern about labor and the availability of labor and what's going to happen when we all get old. And I
When's
don't
that?
have those answers.
When's that? When's the
I
old
think
part?
I think I would extend that thinking, Mark, because I think if you go back and you know, not just bugs and car, but not just uh, stagecoaches and cars, but you go to the Peter Drucker economy. We all are old enough on this call that we can remember what the cognitive economy was going to be like, and it was going to change the way business did, and it did. It just took 50
Mm-hmm.
years, and then the internet came on, and we were going to disintermediate and close all the malls, and that happened, but it took 50 years. And then communication came on with cell phones, and 25 years ago it was $5 a minute to call Europe. Now communication is free. We're on the call right now. It's not costing us what's probably costing you, John, for your subscription, but communication is essentially free. And each one of those technological leaps, people doomsday it to death. And so
Yeah.
I can see why they're doing it. The one thing that has changed dramatically with AI is the pace of change. It is just fundamentally different in its impact across every segment of society and business. It's fundamentally different. These other changes that we've talked about, they took time to eat their way into the cultural consciousness
Yeah.
and even longer to have that impact felt. And I think that's going to be the sea change, that we're all dealing with something that's going to happen so quickly that we may not be able to control it as well as we would like to.
And that's actually, a question that formulated in my mind. Is AI, in general terms, another tool in the toolkit? Or is it more analogous to electricity? So if you had a manufacturing plant run by steam, coal power, horsepower, and you had one down the street making the same widget powered by electricity, which one's going to win?
Mm-hmm.
You
I think
know,
if you
and
talk to any of the any enterprise LLM producers, John, they would tell you it's electricity. That's
yeah,
how they're trying to price it. That's where they're trying to find it. It's a utility. Jensen Wang says that all the time, that everybody's going to own their own utility in this respect. I'm not sure that's entirely accurate. I think
uh-huh.
it's more like uh, electricity, but you got to have something to plug into it,
Yeah.
right? And that's what we're missing. Right now, what we plug into that is intelligence, but I don't think that's the answer.
Well, we have, what is the expression I heard? That energy is intelligence. It kind of wraps that stuff in a pithy way, but I think we have intelligence, but what we don't necessarily have, going back to Mark's point, is we don't necessarily have the necessary acumen and life experience to have good judgment within that intelligence. That intelligence is another avenue of input for the decision maker.
Yeah, I actually kind of object to calling AI intelligence. I think there's a real difference there. It's not really intelligence. It's a probabilistic thing that's
Hmm.
it's trying to predict the most likely next word that it's supposed to say, and it's not thinking in the same way we do. So now I'm not saying that it won't ever get there, but it's going to be there's going to be some time and
It's a long
a
way.
lot of horsepower between here
Yeah.
and there. There's going to be a lot of nuke plants just producing enough electricity to make that go.
Yeah.
You can simplify it. The biggest problem with an LLM in any regulated situation is that the errors that it does find, it finds after the answer has been generated, not before, not when it's in process, but after it's generated.
That's a good point.
So if you're using an AI tool to run your compliance program, what I just described is actually exactly how a regulator would describe a lack of a compliance program, that you find the error at the end. So I think that's going to be a problem for LLMs, and whether that mathematics, the stochasticity of the mathematics
Hmm.
is able to be corrected in some post-processing fashion. I'm not personally aware of how that might happen, but that's the only solution that I think could possibly save people from making what I think are really dramatic mistakes right now in the way that we're using these tools.
Yeah, and I'm curious because you talked about earlier about vectors and you talk about RAG and all this other stuff, but those search or those retrieval techniques tend to lose their efficacy once you reach a certain point in terms of volume of record, if I understand them correctly. And sometimes I wonder when we're looking at this at how much old is becoming new again. Because in our tool, we designed it to function around clusters of keywords, and we have some affiliations and some really nice math and curvaceousness going on with the algos. It works great. It works fantastic. But we've had issues sometimes because if you're going to run a vector search or use RAG, it limits your records. And we're dealing with millions upon millions of records. And how do you know you get to the right answer if you only look at a tranche of them? And
You use a deterministic technique to drive your engine, John. Take that thinking out of it. What you just described is the symptom of using an LLM as the brain. The LLM looks at stochastic relationships. It's not looking at words. It's not looking at your problem. It's looking at the words that you gave it and the relationship of those words to one another in the attention context that you've given it. I know that's a mouthful. It probably doesn't speak English to most people, but it just means it doesn't work for that.
You are way out there for most.
Yeah, but therein is the challenge. How many people using this technology today recognize that difference? Not necessarily I have to use words that have more consonants and vowels and twist tongues in my brain into knots, but hey, there is a huge difference. And if you use this, the risk is you only have an 80% chance or a 43% chance or whatever it is, actually getting to maybe not the right answer, but a right enough answer versus something that brings with it. I hate to use the energy analogy, Mark, but you want energy that's reliable and dispatchable. Energy that's intermittent does not help you produce more widgets. It doesn't get your food cooked. You need stuff you can rely on. When is that fight and that difference going to be manifest in the decisions that these companies are making?
That is very unclear right now. I think very unclear. And we're going to find out. We're going to find out. Probably the hard way, I would say.
Yeah. So I'm curious too. I got to ask this question. Anthropic. Every stinking quarter, it feels like Chicken Little is running around talking about people are being replaced. The sky is falling. We won't even need satellites. We don't need a sun anymore because AI is going to take everything over. And we don't, like I said, we can sit on a couch eat peanut M&Ms for the rest of our lives. How much of what's going on out there, guys, would y'all, and this is open question, feel free to pontificate and prognosticate on it. How much is hype and how much is reality today?
So first, I would say Anthropic has mastered the art of press in the United States. We're a country of clickbait headlines, and if you have any doubt, open up any of your news aggregators, MSN or CNN or anybody, and half of it is going to be about what somebody wore to some event last night and who took exception to that. I mean, it's crap. So I think to some degree, we have to take everything that comes out of Anthropic with a bit of a grain of sand. There are two lenses to this world. One is it's going to be horrific and it's terrible, and that's what gets all the headlines.
Uh-huh.
And the other is that it's going to solve some of the fundamental problems that mankind has been trying to solve forever. And those don't get the headlines. So Anthropic is simply leaning where they get the press. And I think their market value and their consumer value has improved pretty dramatically as a result of them being the clickbait king.
Well, their revenues certainly have. Their revenues are growing at a rate that has never been seen before in the industrialized world. It's pretty amazing what's happening, but it's really all about the the value that they bring, or people that perceive they bring, and the thinking tax that's added over the top of that.
They've mastered the thinking tax. Think about it. From 5 to 11 a.m., they regulate how much you can use. They doubled your cost. They didn't even tell you that was coming. It's not in your user agreement, but we changed our mind.
Well, that's actually a question I have for you guys, and especially for you, Dave, because when you think about the revenue dollars that Anthropic has been gathering, and this massive revenue ramp they have, how much of that is hollow revenue? And by hollow, it's because there's still no one's buying the output. They're buying, whether they know it or not, the process, and sometimes repetitively over and over and over and over again. At what point does the market get wise to that and the revenue has to shift from process to the output? Because those are two different numbers unless they find a way to reconcile them. And, is that $30 billion ramp may actually be 10.
So I think they're coming at it from two different ways. I think, first of all, every enterprise frontier LLM company has been buying users because
Mm-hmm.
ultimately the cost of compute will come down and the number of users will come up, and somewhere those lines should cross and you should be profitable. What I don't think anyone is counting on is the kind of swings that we've seen from politics and behaviors and press. So, for example, when the government chose OpenAI over Anthropic and Trump came out with his temper tantrum about Anthropic, not realizing you don't get rid of an LLM. It's not like a switch you
Mm-hmm.
can turn off. Everybody jumped from ChatGPT to Claude, and I
Mm-hmm.
think they saw 4 million users in some relatively short period of time. So we're seeing some changes like that. I think the enterprise model companies are also coming at it from the standpoint that we can increase token spend by changing the architecture and the way that we're actually having our systems work with people. And
Mm-hmm.
they've done that by changing your subscription. Now, everybody's subscription has a buy more time feature, right? How many of us have not loaded up our buy more time with the hundreds of dollars we need to keep working when we want to work? They've already started to regulate the times you can use it. They've already started all these techniques we talked about to increase your
Mm-hmm.
token spend. And agents are just going to be the latest. Agents are the way to spend more money than you could possibly spend on tokens, because if they're poorly designed, you could leave work and they'll run all night. There's some real problems coming in the agent world, in my opinion.
Yeah. Yeah. Mark, what are your thoughts on that?
Well, I mean, I live this every day. I mean, there are days that I am out of my, allocated tokens by, 9 o'clock in the morning. That's pretty common. Of course, it does force me to stop and get up and go get a cup of coffee and think of
Mm-hmm.
things and maybe do some other kind of work, because, you get focused and you're driving in on something that says, up, you're done. This will reset at 1 in the afternoon. Oh, thanks. Um, I think Anthropic is really working that angle for a reason, though, the 5 to 11
Mm-hmm.
thing, because they're just compute limited. They don't have enough compute to handle the demand that they've got. So they're making people think about it a little more and, use, some of those off times more. They just, they can't build data centers fast enough to keep it going. And the
Mm-hmm.
hyperscalers are only, there's only so many of them out there, and they just cannot keep it up. There's so much demand. People are starting to get into it. They're starting to understand what it means. And also, I think people are starting to understand that what it means to them personally is they either get involved with both feet and start going, or they're going to be in trouble.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
this is one thing that you really want to be on the leading edge of. It's happening very fast. You got to put a lot of cognitive cycles into being able to use it. And that's hard. I mean, the cognitive load for me when I'm developing is way, way higher than it ever has been, because I'm not just worried about, some of the details in this code and reading some manual, some obscure thing about
Mm-hmm.
how to interact with a certain library or something like that. All that's gone. It's the cognitive load of solving these much, much bigger problems. That is, I mean, it's almost intoxicating when you're working on that, because
It's not almost intoxicating. It's like a drug.
yeah, I mean, it really is, and it's
The first few
amazing.
weeks of it, John, you just can't believe what your brain does to you. It just, you go to bed at night and you think, I don't need that much sleep. I really don't need that much sleep.
My tokens are going to renew at 5 in the morning. Let's go.
That's right. That's exactly
I get
right.
a little bit of sleep, and then let's make it happen. It is. It's a powerful situation. I love it because I love the design aspects of it. I'm solving really big problems. I'm making things happen at a speed that I could not have predicted in ever. If you'd have told me 6 months ago that we'd be where we are right now, I told you, nah, no way, no possible way. And here I am. It's quite remarkable, in my opinion.
Well, I would throw out the idea too that the people who most, in my opinion, who have the most to gain and lose right now are anybody in knowledge work, white collar type work, but with that risk of that risk of driving towards obsolescence or being driven towards obsolescence comes with a massive opportunity, maybe many. I really believe we're on the verge of having something like, the transition into the industrial age in terms of small businesses with 50 or less people. I think that segment of their economy is going to absolutely explode in ways, in an accelerated fashion, accelerated explosion that I don't know that anybody really can wrap their mind around right now. Because, the big enterprises, they've got a lot of decisions to make. And the big brands, I think, will linger for some time in many cases. And I think there's a middle ground that a lot of companies will fall in and out of. But that south of 50 headcount company and how far you can lever the talent of a person, much less 50, with this technology is mind-boggling.
Yeah, I think it's really going to change things dramatically in the venture capital space because we have these small companies, very, very agile, very judgment driven, very lean. Companies like Dave's and mine, and they are, typically, I mean, how we work this is we build these companies up and we end up getting bought by bigger companies. They're looking for innovation because the big companies have a hard time with innovation. They have a hard time steering those big ships. And we'll integrate into those big companies. It may be faster and easier than it has ever been to integrate our stuff into their operations because there's fewer people involved. There's less change management that has to happen, and it'll be easier for them to take all of that innovation and all of those things that we've created and work it through their entire operation. That is always a big, big problem for the larger companies trying to figure out a way to innovate, because innovate is change, and change in a company with a lot of employees gets harder and harder and harder and harder because they're all very much based on process. And, people ask the question, well, it was okay to use this process yesterday. Why is it not okay to use it today? And so getting them to do something that's just a little better, a little different, a little more efficient, or a little more directed in a certain way is, in fact, quite difficult. Yeah, I talk about that a bit in the all stack developer paper, and it's a hard thing to do. It really is.
I think that leads to the most difficult part of AI today is the cultural readiness of enterprises to adopt AI tools and to use AI tools. And that kind of what you're talking about, Mark, is it's just people don't know what they can do with it and what they can't. There's this theory, like I call it the McKinsey theory, because it's how McKinsey and Accenture make their money, is they figure out what's the greatest anxiety that a CEO has today. And today it's that I know I'm supposed to adopt AI and I don't know how. I don't know what it's safe for. I don't know what I can do. And so they're looking for expertise, and that's where they kind of lean in to try to find that.
Well, that gives a huge advantage to, AI native CEOs like you and me. Really does. We can move.
We hope so.
way faster than they can. And
yeah, you know what I like about all this?
Power.
A lot. The three of us, we have decades of experience. People for years now talking about AI, you can't be AI native. You didn't grow up with it. You weren't using it in college or high school and when you're in 20s or whatever. The number of changes, which is my generation, Gen X, that we've seen from a technology perspective are insane. And the pace at which they've happened and the transitions and the uncertainty that comes with it. And I don't view this as, this is email replacing the fax machine. It's not that, it's more for certain. But what's interesting is we're having this conversation. All three of us are drawing on decades of experience and business acumen, successes, failures, false starts,
mostly
great starts. Happy accidents on occasion, and all this sort of stuff. And, I worry sometimes about these new college grads and high school grads coming up and they haven't earned enough life experience to be on the same judgmental plane or judgment capable plane as someone who's had decades in business and understands every stack in that business backwards and forwards. And that's going to be very interesting to me, because my concern is not, are we all going to be replaced with robots in UBI? My concern is, what's going to happen to our consumer economy when people from 22 to 34 can't or are not finding a job market that's on friendly footing for them,
Worries me a
and
lot.
gain experience and be able to become consumers themselves.
Yeah, we are losing, in a way, we're losing some of those entry level positions that people would normally come up through to gain that experience, and that's going to be it's going to be a challenge for sure.
Huge. We're about to wrap up because we've been talking for the better part of an hour, and I think we've probably got, I don't know, what, dozen and a half rabbit holes we could go down. You might want to save that for another show.
We can come back another time.
David,
you could pick one of those rabbit holes. And
we can do that another time.
We can do it another time.
Oh, yeah. Oh, and we will. That is guaranteed. But David, I want to let you have the last word, because I think so much of what you touched on, and Mark as well, but the cost factors and other factors of how these LLMs are functioning, and how we can see in motion that they're figuring out, how do we take what resources we're using right now and squeeze more revenue out of the consumer? I'm just curious, what other thoughts might you share that'd be helpful here as we wrap up for, well, and let's just put a marker down and say for SMBs, solopreneurs up to, small, medium companies, what could they be doing, watching out for, doing better to adapt and surf this wave as it goes forward?
So the first is, I would think of tokens as a unit of cost, not a unit of value. The enterprise models want you to believe that it's both, and it's not, because you're not actually able to develop that structural relationship between what the enterprise is actually paying for, which is correct, auditable answers, versus the thinking to get answers that might be correct, auditable answers. So that's the first thing. I think the second thing is, we've created these incentives that I call perverse incentives in the way AI has been rolled out. And I don't believe that ultimately enterprise models should be governing what's happening in the AI landscape. They are a tool. And so there will be, in my estimation, whether it's 9606 or Nabari with our open teams, there will be an operating system for AI that's going to develop over 2026 and start to roll out. And by the end of this year, we'll start seeing the impact of this unregulated agent development, where the agents are being driven by a brain that is right 87% of the time. And those 13% failures are going to get dang expensive in the next year.
But, I mean, this ain't baseball. Hitting 300 is not good enough.
Right.
By a long shot. Man, David, thanks so much for joining. Mark, thank you so much.
Always a pleasure.
Look, if people want to dive deeper, we're all connected on LinkedIn. You find one of us, you'll find the rest of us. Birds of a feather flock together, all that jazz. But I'd point out, too, that in my feed, as well as Mark's and in David's feed on LinkedIn, you can find these white papers, Rise of the All-Stack Developer, as well as the Thinking Tax. And if you want to stay ahead and be on the leading edge of this, those are two papers that are relatively straightforward, easy to read, but they're also spot on to where we are today and where we're going tomorrow. So avail yourself of that opportunity, and feel free to reach out to any one of us. As you can tell, this is something that we're all pretty fired up about. And look, everybody in this economy has a chance to grab the tiger by the tail and hold on for the ride. Or as we say in Texas, grab a hold and put your spurs in a belly band. We're going to ride this thing. And we can definitely do it. And most importantly, you can do it as well. So thanks so much, gentlemen, for joining me today on this episode of the C-Suite Edge inside Open Technologies.